for signs of biological activity without assuming that alien life must use exactly the same chemistry as Earth life. Instead of asking only, do we see this specific molecule? Scientists can ask broader questions. Is there an unusual chemical imbalance? Is there a pattern that seems difficult to maintain without an energy-consuming process? Is there complexity that is difficult to explain through ordinary chemistry? Does something show a behavior that resembles self-maintaining systems? These questions are much harder to answer, but they could expand the search beyond Earth-like biology. Consider a simple example. Imagine discovering a planet with an atmosphere containing several gases that should naturally react with each other and disappear over time, yet the gases remain present in significant quantities. Something must be replenishing them. On Earth, life can create atmospheric chemical disequilibrium by continuously consuming energy and producing waste products. But an alien world could maintain a chemical imbalance for completely different reasons. Scientists would therefore need to study the entire environment rather than treating one molecule as a definitive answer. Context matters. A chemical signal alone might be ambiguous, but a chemical signal combined with temperature, atmospheric structure, surface conditions, energy sources, and other observations could become much more compelling. Another possibility is that alien life may not be located on the surface of a planet at all. Our solar system contains worlds where hidden environments may exist beneath layers of ice. Some icy moons may contain subsurface oceans. If life exists there, sunlight might not be the main energy source. Instead, chemical reactions between water, rock, and other materials could potentially provide energy. This creates a major detection challenge. A telescope observing the surface may see almost nothing that obviously indicates life. The organisms could be hidden kilometers beneath ice. If we only search for surface biosignatures, we could completely miss them. This is why future exploration may need to involve not only telescopes, but also spacecraft, landers, probes, and eventually perhaps missions capable of sampling material from environments that are currently inaccessible. There's another fascinating possibility, life that is extremely different from Earth life, but still follows the basic principles of chemistry and physics. Scientists do not necessarily need to imagine magical biology that violates natural laws. Alien life could still be based on molecules and chemical reactions, but it might use different molecular structures, different solvents, different energy pathways, or different environmental conditions. Earth, water, is essential to known life. But scientists have considered whether other liquids could potentially support complex chemistry under the right conditions. If life elsewhere evolved in a very different environment, it might not fit our traditional definition of a habitable environment. This means the phrase habitable planet can sometimes be misleading. A world does not necessarily need to look like Earth to be interesting. It needs to have some environment where complex chemistry could potentially occur and persist. And that brings us to one of the strangest possibilities of all. What if extraterrestrial life is not something we can easily separate into individual organisms? Earth biology has familiar categories. We see cells, organisms, populations, ecosystems, and species. But perhaps alien biology could exist as a distributed system. Imagine a network of chemical processes spread across an environment rather than a single organism. Would we call that life? What if there is no obvious boundary between one organism and another? What if the organism is an entire ecosystem? What if it exists partly in rocks, partly in an ocean, and partly in the atmosphere? The definitions we use might become inadequate. This is why scientists sometimes discuss the definition of life itself. There is no single universally perfect definition that solves every possible situation. We can describe many characteristics associated with life on Earth, such as metabolism, reproduction, evolution, organization, and the ability to maintain internal conditions. But if we encounter something completely unfamiliar, we may have to decide which characteristics are truly fundamental and which are simply features of Earth biology. And perhaps the most challenging scenario would involve something that looks artificial but is not obviously biological. Imagine scientists discover a repeating pattern on a distant planet. It is highly organized. It appears to contain information. It is difficult to explain through known geology. Would that automatically mean intelligent life? Not necessarily. Natural systems can create complex patterns. Scientists would need to investigate whether the pattern has a plausible natural explanation. On the other hand, imagine the pattern contains a level of information, or structures or other technological effects could also potentially become clues. But even here, the same problem exists. What if we see a technosignature but do not recognize it? Perhaps an advanced civilization communicates in a method we have never considered. Perhaps its technology operates at wavelengths we rarely monitor. Perhaps it uses signals that look like natural astronomical phenomena. Perhaps it deliberately avoids broadcasting. Or perhaps the civilization is so advanced that its technology becomes indistinguishable from natural processes to us. This creates a profound challenge. How do you recognize Intelligence, when you don't know how that intelligence communicates. Humans have a tendency to search for familiar patterns. We expect communication to involve something similar to radio, images, mathematics, or structured signals. But another civilization could have developed communication methods completely outside our current technological experience. It may not use electromagnetic signals in the way we expect. It may use physical systems, information, networks, or communication methods that humanity has not yet discovered. That doesn't mean every strange signal is alien. In fact, most strange astronomical signals probably have natural explanations. The lesson is simply that our search strategies have limitations. Now imagine that humanity eventually discovers a world where something unusual is happening. Scientists detect a chemical pattern. Then they observe seasonal changes. Then they find an atmospheric imbalance. A separate mission detects organic compounds. Another instrument finds evidence that liquid water may have existed or may still exist. None of these observations alone proves life, but together they create a growing mystery. Scientists begin to realize that the world is doing something unusual. They perform more experiments. They compare models. They test geological explanations. They investigate contamination. Years pass. Eventually, researchers become confident that no known non-biological process explains all of the evidence. At that moment, humanity may face a historic problem. What exactly should we call it? Potential life? Probable life? Evidence consistent with biology? Scientists would probably avoid making a definitive claim until the evidence was extremely strong. But imagine the day when multiple independent teams finally agree that the simplest explanation is that life exists beyond Earth. That discovery would change our understanding of the universe forever. But there's another possibility that is perhaps even more unsettling. What if we find extraterrestrial life and do not realize it for decades? What if an old spacecraft collected a sample years ago, but scientists did not have the technology to interpret it? What if a telescope has already observed a biosignature, but researchers considered it ordinary chemistry? What if data sitting in an archive contains evidence that somewhere out there, 124 light years away, a small red dwarf star continues to warm a planet that may, or may not, harbor a global ocean thick with drifting microbial life, quietly producing a gas that smells on our own world like the edge of the sea? And somewhere back on Earth, a team of scientists keeps watching, keeps questioning their own best result, and keeps waiting for the universe to answer more clearly than it has so far. It's worth pausing to actually picture what Madhusudan's team believes they might be looking at, because the Hycean world concept they coined is stranger and in some ways more alien than the oceans we know here on Earth. If K218b really is a Hycean world, its surface, in the loosest sense of the word, would be a single planet-wide ocean with no continents, no islands, nothing resembling dry land anywhere at all, just stretching uninterrupted around the entire circumference of the planet, sealed beneath a thick, hazy atmosphere made mostly of hydrogen, a gas so light it would feel almost weightless compared to the air we breathe on Earth, yet dense enough at K218b's scale to trap heat and pressure the ocean below into conditions unlike anything found in any sea on our own planet, depending on exactly how deep that ocean runs. The crushing pressure at its base could compress water into exotic high-pressure ice phases that don't naturally occur anywhere on Earth, forming a strange boundary layer between liquid ocean and whatever rocky or icy material makes up the planet's true interior, far below. The temperature at the cloud tops of K218b's atmosphere, based on current modeling, could sit within a range broadly compatible with liquid water, but conditions closer to the surface, REMA, in genuinely uncertain, with some models suggesting an ocean that could be temperate and stable and others suggesting conditions closer to a runaway greenhouse, far too hot for any Earth-like biology to tolerate. This uncertainty is precisely Da's use. Hi, Madhusudan has been careful in nearly every public statement since the announcement to describe DMS specifically as a possible biosignature E, rather than confirmed proof of anything. The chemistry might be right, but the underlying planet it's coming from remains in important ways still a hypothesis rather than a fully mapped, understood world. It's worth spending a moment on what it would actually mean, practically and philosophically, if this specific detection ultimately survives the ongoing scrutiny and gets confirmed by independent teams using independent instruments in the years ahead. For one, it would represent the first time in human history that credible scientific evidence pointed toward life existing anywhere beyond our own solar system. Not a hypothesis, not a statistical argument about how many habitable planets probably exist across the galaxy, but an actual specific testable signal from an actual specific nameable planet. Every previous discussion of extraterrestrial life across the entire history of science has been forced to remake posts, and almost entirely theoretical, resting on probability arguments like the Drake equation rather than direct observational evidence. A confirmed detection at K2-18b would end that particular chapter of human history permanently, regardless of what came next. It would also, almost immediately, raise a far harder set of questions than it answered. If life can arise and thrive within a hydrogen-rich atmosphere over a planet-wide ocean, with no dry land, no familiar continents, and chemistry potentially very different from Earth's own biology, it would suggest that life itself might be far more chemically flexible and far more common throughout the galaxy than most models built purely round Earth-like conditions have ever assumed. Sub-Neptune planets like K2-18b, after all, are already known to be among the most common planetary types found throughout the Milky Way Y, meaning that if Hyson worlds really can host life, the total number of potentially habitable environments scattered across the galaxy could turn out to be dramatically larger than scientists have generally estimated, simply because an entire category of planet, previously written off as too alien to bother searching closely, would suddenly become a serious candidate worth investigating in detail. None of that changes the immediate scientific reality, though, which remains stubbornly, deliberately cautious. Extraordinary claims, as the saying long attributed to astronomer Carl Sagan goes, require XD. Where ordinary evidence and a 3 sigma detection, even one built on genuinely careful, repeated observation, still falls well short of that bar. Madhusudan's team knows this better than anyone, which is exactly why, in the same announcement that generated so many breathless headlines around the world, they were also the ones most insistent that nobody, including themselves, should treat this as a confirmed discovery just yet. Perhaps the most genuinely interesting part of this entire story is the position it leaves everyone in, scientists and the public alike, of having to sit patiently with a question that remains open rather than being handed a clean, satisfying answer either way. Madhusudan has described the current situation, in various interviews since the announcement, as being at an early, uncertain stage of what could become one of the most important discoveries in the history of science, while being equally clear that it could just as easily turn out to be nothing at all, an unusual non-biological chemical process, still entirely unknown to human science, quietly producing a signal that merely resembles life. His chemical signature without actually indicating anything living at all. Both outcomes remain genuinely possible, given the current data, and honest scientists on every side of the debate, including the team behind the skeptical July 2025 NASA-led reanalysis, have been careful not to claim more certainty than the evidence currently supports in either direction. That patience, uncomfortable as it might feel to anyone hoping for a dramatic final answer, is exactly what responsible science looks like when it's working correctly. It took 9 years, from K2-18b's initial discovery in 2015 to the 2023 hint to the 2025 stronger detection to the ongoing 2025 debate over its true meaning, just to arrive at this current, still unresolved point. And it will very likely take several more years of additional observation time, independent analysis, and healthy scientific disagreement before anyone can responsibly say, one way or the other, exactly what's happening in the atmosphere of a small, distant world orbiting a faint red star in the constellation Leo. Somewhere out there, 124 light-years away, a small red dwarf star continues to warm a planet that may, or may not, harbor a global ocean thick with drifting microbial life, quietly producing a gas that smells, on our own world, like the edge of the sea. And somewhere back on Earth, a team of scientists keeps watching, keeps questioning their own best result, and keeps waiting for the universe to answer more clearly than it has so far. Nobody has thought to analyze in the right way. This is not impossible. Scientific discoveries often happen when new technologies allow researchers to reinterpret old observations. A signal that once looked meaningless can become significant when scientists develop better models. An image that seemed ordinary can reveal something new when viewed with higher resolution. A chemical pattern can become interesting when researchers understand more about how environments work. In that sense, the search for extraterrestrial life may not depend only on finding new worlds. It may also depend on learning how to understand the data we already have. Artificial intelligence and advanced data analysis could potentially play an important role in this process. Modern telescopes and spacecraft can produce enormous amounts of information. Humans cannot manually examine every detail. Machine learning systems can search for unusual patterns, compare huge data sets, and identify relationships that might otherwise be overlooked. But AI also has limitations. A system can identify something unusual without knowing what it means. An unusual pattern is not automatically evidence of life. Human scientists still need to investigate the physical explanation. The future search for life may therefore become a partnership between advanced instruments, computational systems, and human scientific reasoning. Another important question is contamination. Imagine a spacecraft lands on another world and detects a molecule associated with life. Before scientists celebrate, they must ask, did that molecule come from the extraterrestrial environment? Or did we bring it from Earth? Spacecraft are carefully cleaned and designed to reduce contamination, but the problem is extremely serious. Earth is full of microorganisms and organic molecules. If even tiny amounts of terrestrial material reach another world, scientists could potentially confuse Earth biology with alien biology. This is why planetary protection is such an important part of space exploration. Scientists need to preserve the integrity of samples so that when something extraordinary is discovered, they can be confident about where it came from. The same issue applies to samples returned to Earth. If a spacecraft brings material from another world, scientists must study it under carefully controlled conditions. They need to protect the sample from contamination and also protect Earth from any potentially unknown biological material. These concerns become more important as missions become more sophisticated. But perhaps the biggest lesson from all of this is that finding extraterrestrial life may not be a single dramatic moment. Hollywood often imagines alien discovery as a clear event. A spacecraft appears, a message arrives, or a strange creature is found. Real science may look completely different. The discovery could begin with a tiny anomaly buried in a data set. One scientist notices something unusual. Another team tries to explain it. A laboratory repeats the analysis. A different telescope observes the same target. Researchers publish competing explanations. Other scientists attempt to disprove the result. Years of work follow, and slowly the evidence becomes stronger. The first confirmed extraterrestrial life may therefore arrive not with a dramatic announcement, but with a scientific argument that becomes impossible to ignore. And there is something deeply fascinating about that possibility. Maybe alien life is not hiding from us. Maybe we are simply not yet capable of recognizing it. We have only one example of life, one planet, one biological history, one evolutionary tree. That means our understanding of what life can be is based on an extremely small sample size. The universe, however, contains an almost unimaginable number of worlds. If life emerged independently somewhere else, there is no guarantee that it would repeat Earth's evolutionary story. It might be similar in some ways because chemistry and physics impose certain constraints, but it could also be radically different. It could use unfamiliar molecules. It could live in unexpected environments. It could leave unusual signatures. It could communicate in ways we do not understand. And it could exist in a form that challenges our definition of life itself. This is why the search for extraterrestrial life is not simply a hunt for aliens. It is also a test of our own assumptions. We are asking nature a question, but we are doing so with instruments and concepts created by humans. Every telescope has limits. Every detector has a range. Every model has assumptions. Every definition has boundaries. The universe does not have to fit inside them. Perhaps the most exciting discovery would not be finding something that looks exactly like Earth life. Perhaps it would be finding something that forces us to completely rethink what life can be. Imagine the moment when scientists finally realize that the strange chemical process they have been studying for years is not just chemistry. It is biology. Imagine discovering that an environment thought to be sterile actually contains a living system. Imagine finding a microscopic organism whose chemistry is clearly independent from Earth's. Or imagine detecting a signal that cannot be explained by nature and carries unmistakable evidence of intelligence. Each possibility would transform humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. But there is a final question we should ask. What if the first extraterrestrial life we discover does not look like life at all? What if it looks like chemistry? What if it looks like geology? What if it looks like noise? What if it looks like an ordinary atmospheric pattern? What if it is hidden beneath ice, inside rock, beneath an ocean, or encoded in a signal we currently classify as meaningless? In that case, the greatest challenge may not be traveling farther into the universe. It may be learning to look differently. The search for extraterrestrial life is ultimately a search for something we have never seen before. And that means we must remain open to the possibility that our first discovery will surprise us. Scientists will need to question their assumptions, test alternative explanations, develop new instruments, and create better ways to recognize biological and technological activity. We may need to expand the definition of a biosignature. We may need to rethink what makes an environment habitable. We may need to consider forms of life that do not resemble anything on Earth. And perhaps one day, after years of searching, humanity will encounter something extraordinary. At first, scientists may not call it alien life. They may call it an anomaly, then an unexplained chemical process, then an unusual environmental pattern, then a possible biological signature. Researchers will investigate it again and again. Independent teams will examine the evidence. New observations will be collected. Alternative explanations will be eliminated. And eventually the world may hear a sentence that changes history forever. We are not alone. But perhaps the most remarkable part will be what happened before that announcement. Maybe the evidence was already there. Maybe humanity had already seen it. Maybe we had already collected the data. Maybe we had already looked directly at the clue. We simply did not understand what we were seeing. And that possibility makes the search for extraterrestrial life even more fascinating, because somewhere in the enormous universe, life may already exist. The real question may not be whether we will find it. The real question may be whether, when we finally encounter it, we will recognize it.